This video is sponsored by Classic Football Shirts, the best place to get your classic and vintage football shirts. To get cheap retro Palace shirts, click the link in the description below. And for an extra 10% off, use the code CFSPJ10 at checkout. Hello and welcome to the Crystal Palace podcast. I'm Alfonso Greenborough, and in today's podcast I'll be looking over the game against Arsenal by bringing my match review, player rankings and my man of the match. As well as this, I'm also going to bring you interviews with Roy Hodgson, Luka Milivojevic, Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Patrick Van Aanholt after the game. So let's begin. Luka Milivojevic banished his penalty demons by netting twice from the spot to gain Palace a point against Arsenal on a thrilling afternoon in S3E14. 3 goals in the space of 10 minutes either side of half-time saw Milivojevic put his team in front in stoppage time, but a Granit Xhaka free kick and a controversial goal by Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang saw the game completely switch. However, with 8 minutes to go, Wilfried Zaha won another penalty for Palace, and the Serbian skipper slammed it into the net to steal a point for his team, who arguably deserved more from the thrilling encounter. Despite one side coming into the game with 11 straight wins and the other not scored at home in 5 games, the Eagles ignored the form book to enjoy a better start, and they nearly took the lead twice around the 15-minute mark. Firstly, Andros Townsend fizzed a pass across the area that evaded everyone and fell to Zaha, who got the ball under control and thumped a shot off the base of the post. And 60 seconds later, a brilliant Arsenal-esque passing move involving Jordan Ayew, Patrick Van Aanholt and Zaha created a great opportunity for Townsend, who failed to net for the 3rd time in 4 outings against the Gunners by dragging his shot wide of the mark. After a slow start, the visitors began to move through the gears, and Lacazette fired wide after seizing possession on the edge of the box, and then Mesut Ozil caused problems on the right before picking out Hector Bellerin in a good position, but an excellent sliding block by Aaron Wan-Bissaka snuffed out the chance. But Palace continued to hold their own and had a strong first shout for a penalty when Zaha played a no-look pass into Ayew's path, who raced in front of Mustafi and legs tangled inside the area. However, Martin Atkinson waved play on, but in the first half stoppage time the German did concede a spot kick that left the official in no doubt. After a corner failed to be cleared, the ball came to Cheku Kouyaté, who was rashly launched into from behind by Mustafi. Showing real guts after missing from 12 yards 7 days earlier, Milivojevic confidently stepped up and drilled it into the bottom corner of Bertonello's goal to net Palace's first goal in SE25 since May. However, Palace's season of misfortune continued, as 10 minutes into the second half they saw the game turn on its head through little fault of their own. On 51 minutes the visitors won a free kick on the corner of the area and Xhaka whacked it towards the top corner, and despite Wayne Hennessy getting a fingertip to it, Palace's woodwork luck failed them again as the ball kissed the top of the post and flicked into the net. And 4 minutes later a controversy hung over Sellers as a corner was swung into the box and Lacazette flicked it towards goal with his airband hand, allowing Aubameyang the chance to squeeze the ball over the line from close range despite Hennessy's heroic attempts to keep it out. But the goal line decision system informed Atkinson that the ball had crossed the line by literally a millimetre or two. Incredibly, after 2 huge setbacks, luck continued to desert Palace, and following the introduction of Max Meyer, the German was played in by Zaha, and despite a tight angle, he was next to hit the post, who then also blasted over in a congested box. For all their positivity, the hosts scarcely deserved to be behind, but on 82 minutes they were handed a chance to level things up from the spot once again. On the counter, Alexander Sorov charged forward and fed Zaha, who tricked his way into the box and was brought down by Xhaka. Once again, Milivojevic took the responsibility upon his shoulders and dispatched a chance to score his 4th goal in his last 3 outings against the Gunners, but more importantly clinch a point for his team. So I'm now going to move on to the player ratings, but before I start, don't forget you can follow us on both Twitter and Facebook at Crystal Palace for all the latest Palace news. And also, if you are on Facebook, do feel free to join our Facebook group, which is a really great place to join in with discussions and also share your opinions with other fans. And if you are someone like myself who likes to often get involved in conversations with other fans on forums, then of course the Facebook group is a great place to go because it just gives you another option where you can obviously connect with fans. And of course, like I said there, you can of course have discussions with them, but also share your opinion. And if you have an opinion which you think might be different from the game, or you may have, let's say, found something from the game or identified something from the game that you may think other fans may not have seen, then of course do feel free to post that in the Facebook group when you join it, and of course that's just so that sort of everyone else can hear your views overall. And of course, if you are someone like myself who does, you know, like to keep up to date with all things Palace, then obviously I would highly recommend you do follow both of our Twitter and Facebook pages. You know, we do regularly update with the latest news, latest interviews, and also after the game we also often post our own opinion on there as well. So if you do want another place obviously to get the news, as well as just sort of having another sort of opinion to look at and read after the game, then of course you know, feel free to follow us on both our Twitter and Facebook pages. Now, another great place to share your opinion is in the YouTube comments. So if you are listening to the podcast on YouTube, then of course feel free to comment below with your player ratings, where you rate the players' performances from 1 to 10. And even if you are an Arsenal fan, or even if you don't want to do your player ratings, then just comment below with your sort of general views of the game. Now, the main reason I want you to do this is just so I can come back to the video or the podcast and basically read what you guys thought about the game, just to give me sort of a bigger sort of view and outlook of the game. And obviously, if you're an Arsenal fan especially, you're going to be quite disappointed that your winning streak had come to an end, albeit you're still unbeaten, but obviously that sort of winning streak's gone. So obviously do feel free to comment that below. But obviously if you are Palace fans, then I would highly recommend, you know, you do comment below with your player ratings, and that's just so that I can come back to the video, come back to the podcast, and basically compare how you thought the players performed, and basically sort of compare that to my own, and see whether we had sort of a general sort of similar outlook of the game. And of course, any other fans who come to the video, not only will they be listening to my opinion in the podcast, but also they can read the comment section as well, just so they can get sort of a more broader view of the game, but also so that you can have discussions as well in the comment section. Now, if you do want to ask me any questions, or you just want to post something, I obviously do regularly reply to any comments. So if you are someone who wants to get into a discussion with myself, something you might not agree with, or maybe something you thought I might have missed, then of course also feel free to comment in below as well. Now, if you do want to follow any of the social media pages that I've mentioned, or join the Facebook group, then do check all links that will be in the description below. But I'm now going to start with the player ratings, and I'm going to start in goal with Wayne Hennessy, who's had a fairly decent start to the season, as I've already mentioned quite a lot in the last few weeks podcast. And once again here, he didn't fail to impress with, once again, a very steady performance. You know, it wasn't necessarily spectacular, and that was mainly because Arsenal didn't really have that many shots and goals. So once again, in terms of being one of our most consistent players this season, he's obviously carried that on into the game here against Arsenal. And like I said last week, you know, I was quite worried in the fact that Arsenal have been playing really well recently, and obviously I was quite dreading it. But the fact that all of the teams sort of bucked their ideas up and just took it up a level, the fact that we were able to do that, and people like Hennessy were just able to keep their performances as they were, that was of course great to see. But like I've said, he's been very consistent this season, and once again I've given him a 6 overall for the game here against Arsenal. Obviously not as good as his last few games, and that's mainly because, you know, the limited chances that Arsenal had, it basically meant that Hennessy wasn't really tested throughout the game, and that's why I do think I've given him a 6, because there wasn't necessarily anything outstanding, but like I've said, he done the simple things right, and that's what we expect. Now, in terms of Xhaka's goal, I might as well start on a negative, in the fact that he was a bit flat-footed for it. Now, I can't deny Xhaka's shot, you know, went into the top corner, lovely bend on it. Yes, most goalkeepers probably won't save that, but Hennessy, you've got to look at it, and maybe you could argue that he was a bit flat-footed for that, so maybe that's why he couldn't quite get over enough to actually get the height to tip it over, or even tip it out as well. But also you've got to look at it in the respect that, yes, it was a good free kick, but Hennessy also got a hand to it. So although he was flat-footed, he still was able to get a hand onto it. But maybe if he was, you know, if he sorted out his sort of his positioning of his feet, maybe he would have been able to just sort of be slightly further to his right, and that would have enabled him to literally stretch up a bit higher, and maybe he would have got more of a hand to it. But I'm not really going to criticise Hennessy for that. I just thought that's something to pick out in terms of how flat-footed he was. But overall, like I said, Xhaka's goal, absolutely fantastic. You know, great free kick, can't really take anything away from him, and really you can't blame Hennessy for that, because, you know, like I've said already, he dived in the right direction, got a hand to it, but the power on it and the accuracy as well was obviously, you know, it can't be you can't obviously discount that goal because it was obviously fantastic. But maybe Hennessy, you could argue, should have done better. Now, of course, you know, Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang, I'm going to talk about his goal later on, but obviously Andre Lacazette handballed it to him, made it really easy for Aubameyang. It was a tap in for him because he obviously tapped the ball down with his hand to Aubameyang. He obviously went forth and scored it. Well, and obviously if you look back at the goal, it obviously went to the goal line technology, and it was literally, I think it was 8mm, and you look back at that, that's actually really small, and it was that much over the line, only just. And if you look back at the pictures, it doesn't even look like, well, it looks like it's barely over the line. So it just goes to show how unlucky we were in the fact that it obviously was a handball in the first place, so it shouldn't have stood, but also in the fact that if Hennessy, even though Hennessy was able to get the ball out, if he had done it and just flicked it literally 8mm further out, then maybe the goal wouldn't have stood, because it wouldn't have gone all the way over the line. But like I said already, you can't really blame Hennessy for that, because at least he made an attempt to actually go down and try and flick the ball out. But like I said already, the goal shouldn't have stood anyway because of the handball by Lacazette. And people saying that obviously there was pushing and shoving inside the box, you're always going to get that, and I don't think it was as aggressive as you get in some games. You know, sometimes you literally have players jumping all over each other, pulling each other down and ripping each other's shirts. Yes, that happened once in this game, but I think overall in this game, I think the sort of corners were fairly contested, and I do think this one, you know, he's put his hand up in the air, he's handballed it, and obviously flicked it to Aubameyang. So I do really think that goal shouldn't have stood. And of course, Hennessy, I don't really think you can give him, you know, any blame on that. But overall, you know, about his performance, I do think it was just a solid performance overall. You know, in between the sticks, he done what he had to do, and obviously he's basically done what we've come to expect from him this season. Because obviously in seasons gone by, he hasn't been great, but the fact that he's now rebuilding his reputation by being a very consistent performer for Palace is of course great to see. But like I said already, the reason I've given him a 6 is that even though he had no chances with the goal, I do think he made a number of sort of good aerial takes in terms of balls into the box, and obviously made a few decent saves as well. And like I said, I don't really think he didn't really do too much more in terms of giving him a high rating, so I do think a 6 is really a fair reflection overall of his game. But do comment below with your thoughts about Wayne Hennessy, and obviously, you know, obviously the competition from Gaeta seems to be helping him, but do comment below whether you, or what you think is the main reason why Hennessy's improved so much this season. So I'm going to move on now to the defence, and I'm going to start with the right back, Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Now once again, this guy, you know, I say this nearly every week now, but this guy never really fails to impress me. And once again, he put in a very solid performance against a very strong Arsenal side, and for that reason, I'm going to give him a 7 overall. Now in terms of the main part of his game, which I really was impressed with, is that, you know, the fact that he helped Palace keep our shape. Now, of course, I could go on and talk about the tackles and the blocks he was making, because that's what he does every week. But the thing that I was really impressed about his play, and I suppose you could sort of narrow it down to just his discipline, the way he was in the game, it's just sort of the fact that he helped Palace not lose our shape. Now, what I mean by that is the fact that quite often the fullbacks, because they do go quite far forward and obviously they help in the attack, it quite often leaves sort of spaces in behind, and if they play too wide, like I know Van Aanel in particular has been guilty of that in the past, but sometimes if you play too wide, it leaves too much space in behind, or even it's not necessarily about the space in behind, but it just makes it, because you've dragged out of position, it makes it harder for you to catch up with the attacker. Now, obviously that's sometimes an issue, but the fact that Wan-Bissaka, given that he's got a little, you know, he hasn't got that much experience, the fact that he was able to help Palace keep their shape by the fact that when he went forward, he was able to keep the spaces right, he was able to make sure he was in the right position. The fact that he was able to do that really sort of kept our defence in shape. Now, of course, this is, you know, a bit complex, even I'm struggling to sort of explain it, but I do think the fact that he had that discipline to make sure he was in the right position really did help us keep our defensive shape. Because like I said, if he had gone too far forward, or he'd been too far back or too far wide, obviously that leaves spaces in behind, and people like Aubameyang and Lacazette, they've obviously got the pace to get in behind. So the fact that he was able to not only himself get in the right position, but make sure all of those around him, and he was able to adapt if people change. The fact that he was able to be in the right position, and, you know, ultimately that meant that we didn't lose our shape, that was of course great to see as well. Now obviously people like Aubameyang, Lacazette, he obviously was able to keep them relatively quiet throughout the game, but his main target, I suppose you could say, or his main man to mark, was of course Alex Iwobi. Now this guy, you know, under Unai Emery, he's been quite outstanding this season, and I think if you ask any Arsenal fan, they go, actually he's improved quite a lot this season. Now of course, you know, quite a lot of the time Iwobi was trying to, you know, get in behind the Palace defence and trying to barge past Aaron Wan-Bissaka, but the fact that Wan-Bissaka had too much about him, the fact that he was just being physical, standing up to that threat from Iwobi, as well as the fact that he was making his tackles like he normally does, making blocks, and basically just making it difficult for the opponent to actually get into the area and put crosses in. The fact that he was able to do that against someone like Alex Iwobi, who, like I've said, has been quite good this season, that was of course great to see as well. But I do think overall, you know, obviously he impresses me every week, but this was once again just another impressive performance from him. And once again, you know, we talk about his first few games of Palace, you know, against Tottenham, against Liverpool, against Man United. I think they were sort of the games, or his first ever games he played. Obviously, that was against the Big Six teams, and of course, the fact that he performed so well is why he's got this profile. So the fact that he's continuously putting in these sort of high levels of performances against a quality opposition really just goes to show how good he is. And you know, the sky's the limit for this guy, because at this age, I think he's 20 now, the fact that he's performing so well and so consistently only means that when he gets even more experience, he's only ever going to get better. But I suppose, just to really summarise, and the reason I've given him a 7, is the fact that because he plays so well, it just proves how dependable we are on him now. The fact that he plays so well just proves that even though he's he's the youngest player on the field, he's actually one of our most important in terms of his play. Obviously, like I've already mentioned, he's so good in the tackle, and actually something I did see in this game a lot more was actually his runs forward were fantastic. You know, I think Alan Shearer in particular, who normally doesn't have a nice thing to say about Palace on Match of the Day, but he actually highlighted the fact that not only was Wan-Bissaka's defensive play good, but actually going forward on a number of occasions, you know, in terms of doing 1-2s or just, you know, putting sort of balls on the outside for players to run onto, whatever it was, you know, in terms of his attacking play, that's obviously improved than it has done in recent weeks. And of course, it just added to how good his defensive performance was in the fact that he was able to offer something going forward as well. But the final thing I really want to say, and the final word I suppose, is just outstanding, because I think that's the only word I can really use to describe this guy. Because once again, it may not have been one of his best performances in the fact that, you know, normally he's absolutely outstanding and nothing gets past him. Obviously, a few times Arsenal got past, but once again, this guy is outstanding. The skill he's got, the talent he's got, as well as the fact that he's able to perform at this high level with his inexperience, only proves that he's only going to get better in the future. But Aaron Wan-Bissaka here, a 7 for him. So I'm going to move on now to the first of our 2 centre-backs, and that is of course James Tomkins, who I'm going to give a 7 overall for his performance. Now, in terms of Tomkins, obviously I could talk all day about the defensive performance, because I do think, you know, you look at Xhaka's goal, that was obviously a fantastic free kick, you can't really blame him there. And obviously the second goal, as I've already mentioned, shouldn't have stood, handball by Lacazette, and of course it was just over the line, so you can't really blame too much on the defence for that. And actually, if you put the 2 goals we conceded aside, it actually was a very, very good defensive performance against one of the best attacks in the league so far. Now, when you consider the threat that, you know, Lacazette and Aubameyang have, the pace they've got to get in behind, when you consider they've got all of that threat, Arsenal, when, you know, if you look at it, people like Tomkins and Saka performed so well in the fact that you know, they were able to limit the chances they had. And you know, you only have to look back at the stats in terms of shots taken by Arsenal and compare it to Palace's, and it just goes to show how solid our defence was in terms of restricting chances, in the fact that they had so few. Now, of course, I could talk all day about Tomkins' defensive performance, but the thing that really did impress me is the fact that he was involved at both ends. You know, obviously he'd done his defensive work, but actually a few times when the ball, you know, got put forward when he was up for set pieces, he also, obviously from the very start of the game, was involved at that end as well. So not only was he putting in a very solid defensive performance, but also he was able to go up the other end and obviously, you know, contribute to the attacking or give an attacking contribution when he was in a set piece situation. So the fact that he was able to do that was of course great to see as well. And like I said already, you know, when you've got skillful players like Aubameyang, like Lacazette, the fact that someone like Tomkins was able to perform so well, put in a toe, get the ball off them. And, you know, when you consider it's quite awkward moments as well, you know, when you consider Tomkins isn't the fastest player, the fact that he's able to, or he was able on Sunday to actually match these players and actually, you know, get the ball off them in these situations and these moments in the game was of course really impressive. Now, there isn't really too much more to say about Tomkins' performance, because, you know, he's once again one of our most consistent performers, and you know that, you know, people like Hennessy, Wan-Bissaka, they're always very consistent, but Tomkins is one of these guys. He is literally Mr. Dependable. He always performs well, and of course this was just another performance where he done what he was meant to do, and the fact that he dealt with, you know, like I said, the attacking plays so well is of course great to see as well. But I just want to find my final point really. It's just sort of a phrase or a few words. It's just solid and worked hard. I think that really just does sum up perfectly how Tomkins performed in the game, in the fact that at the back, very rarely did Arsenal manage to get the better of him, so in that respect he was solid. And the fact that he worked hard for the team, yes, he's not the fastest player, but the fact that he dealt with these fast, skillful players, of course, is, you know, you've got to give him credit there. But once again, James Tomkins here, I'm going to give him a 7 overall. So I'm going to move on now to his centre-back partner, Mamadou Sakho. Now, this was once again, you know, I've already mentioned it briefly, but he had a very solid performance. And considering, you know, last weekend he was a bit iffy against Everton, you know, obviously gave away that goal against Tossen in the fact that he wasn't able to close him down enough. So of course lots of people criticising him last week, and I personally said yes, we could criticise him for conceding that goal last weekend, but actually other than that, other than 2 goals we conceded against Everton, he was fairly solid. And that was sort of a similar story here in the fact that his performance was good, but unlike against Everton this week, there was no sort of mistakes from his part in terms of the goals, and that's why I'm going to give him the 8 overall. Now obviously, like I've said already, in terms of, you know, Arsenal's attacking threat, obviously they weren't playing that good in the first half, and understandably so. Obviously they came out sort of raring to go in the second half, so you can understand actually where in the second half Arsenal came out a bit stronger, and obviously people like Saka, there was a bit more pressure on them considering they dealt with them in the first half, but there was more threat in the second. But the fact that, you know, people like Saka, like Tompkins, were able to deal with that sort of attack that failed to click in the first half, the fact they were able to deal with it when it came out much better in the second half was of course great to see as well. And the word I used was resolute to describe Saka's performance, because I do think that's exactly what it was. You know, like I've said already, you know, when you consider the opponents we're against, you know, one of the best attacks in the league this season in terms of they've got the top scorer, they've got people like Lacazette as well and Iwobi, so they've got pace, they've got the top scorer, so of course against an opponent like that you're going to find it difficult. But the fact that the fact that Saka and Tompkins were resolute, and the fact that they were able to restrict the chances that these players have, whether it would be heading the ball away or whether it be, you know, making a tackle, everything was really quite good in that. And like I've said already, you know, they dealt with the threat so well that actually it forced Arsenal to change things up and actually come back even stronger in the second half, basically because they were quite frustrated with the lack of chances they did have in that first half. And, you know, I do go back to the stats. You know, you look back at the shots, the fact that Arsenal had so few shots really just goes to show how well the back four did, but obviously Tompkins and Saka in particular. Now, of course, you know, with and without the ball, I think he was fairly impressive. So when he obviously had the ball, he was very good at passing it out from the back and obviously, you know, allowing Palace to have possession and push on forward. And of course, without the ball, in terms of, you know, restricting Arsenal's forwards, he was good as well. And obviously that's something I talked about last weekend against Everton, in the fact that, yes, he was good with the ball, but sometimes he gave the ball away or was just trying to be too clever and it sort of backfired on him. But this game here, not only did he get the time, or, you know, he didn't just get the time he had off the ball right in terms of making tackles and making blocks, but also he combined that with the fact that he improved his playing out from the back even more, and that is a real asset. And that's the main reason. Obviously Tompkins, I talked about, you know, contributing at both ends of the field, but the fact that Saka was able to pass the ball, you know, get the ball at his feet and pass it forward so efficiently and so well as doing good work off the ball as well, that's the main reason I've given him an 8 as opposed to the 7. And I suppose the word to use, and I use this with Wan-Bissaka, but outstanding again, because I don't really think, you know, like I've said already, you can't really blame 2 goals on him. So actually, if you're looking at the game aside from the goals, you would say he was fairly outstanding from that. And of course, like I said, I do really want to highlight it, because although his defensive performance was good, I do think his passing was so sort of underrated as well, because everyone's talking about the good performance of the team as a whole and how good we were as a collective, and obviously defensively as well. But I do think you've got to look at it as well in the fact that Saka was very, very good and very, very efficient with his passing out from the back. But Mamadou Saka here, an 8 for him. So I'm now going to move on to the final player in our defence, and that is of course the left back Patrick Vernano. Now once again, like I've said in the last few weeks, you know, he's been fairly sort of ineffective in terms of his attacking play, but actually I think he's been fairly solid defensively in the last few games. And once again here, I think this is sort of a common theme other than a few chances here again, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 6 overall. Now in terms of an early chance he had in the game, you know, he had a shot quite early on, and of course that's mainly because Palace, you know, at the beginning of the game, we had quite a lot of chances to go ahead, especially in that sort of first sort of few minutes or so. So of course Fernando, when he got the chance going forward, he obviously took it. Ultimately we weren't able to get anything from it, you know, whether that be you know the rebound going in, or whether it be, you know, someone else getting on the end of it. We weren't able to create anything from it, but it does actually sort of make, in my perspective, I suppose, my sort of outlook on the game, it just proves to me that he's improved slightly on recent games, because I said last week against Everton that although he was fairly sort of competent defensively, I just think we were missing that sort of attacking edge that he's given us previously. And obviously in this game here, albeit he still wasn't that effective going forward, I do think we saw it a lot more when you consider it to the Everton game. So in terms of comparing the 2 games, I think the defensive performance were both good, and they were both what you would expect from someone, but I just think the attacking play against Arsenal was comparatively better than the one against Everton last week. But like I said, quite early on in the game, had a chance from a rebound. Obviously, wasn't able to get on it, but it just, you know, goes to show the number of chances that Palace had. Ultimately we didn't take them, but the fact that we had loads of chances obviously put pressure on Arsenal. Now of course Wilfried Zaha, you know, he was primarily playing as a striker, but he drifted quite often out wide to the left, and obviously that meant that he was, you know, I suppose Wilfried Zaha wasn't necessarily helping Vanano in terms of the defensive work, but I do think going forward, I think them two as a partnership, you know, the 1-2s they were providing each other, that obviously allowed them to both have the freedom going forward. And of course, even though he faded as the game went on, Vanano, I still do think Zaha did help him out, not necessarily just in the offensive side, but there were a few times where Zaha came back just to give that extra support and make a tackle as well. So not only was that partnership down the left hand side used for our attacking play, but also it was used to help the defensive play as well, as sort of players faded out towards the end of the game. But like I've said, when we were sort of out of possession, obviously Arsenal got loads of threat up top, like I've already mentioned. So of course it's great that people like Vanano are obviously able to go forward, but it's also as important for them to go back. So the fact that he was able to, you know, get back when it really mattered when we were out of possession, and someone like Zaha who was partnering him down the left, the fact that he also got involved and sort of just helped him out with his defensive duties, not only shows, I suppose, the great teamwork, but also shows that actually players all across the field can actually give their bit in terms of defensive contribution. But like I've said already, obviously he wasn't necessarily that great going forward, other than that a few chances he had, especially that one early on. And there was also a chance, I think it was when Townsend put his shot wide, you know, great link up play. I think it was someone like RU passes it to Wilf passes it to Vanano, he runs for on goal, puts it across the Townsend puts it just wide. So not only was he having shots quite early on in the game, but also when that chance came to him in terms of that sort of ball from Wilf, he was able to put in a pretty accurate cross into the box. Obviously Townsend weren't able to connect and score from it, but it just goes to show that actually that's what we've been missing in, you know, the last few games. And I said against Everton last weekend, it wasn't really an issue that he weren't really attacking, but obviously it would have been better if he just gave a little bit more offensively, because we know what he's capable of. So the fact that he was able to keep his defensive performance at the same level whilst also starting to, you know, go back to his old self in terms of his attacking play, that was of course, you know, quite good overall. And I suppose the main positive, the only sort of negative from the game, I suppose, and the main reason I've given him a 6 as opposed to a 7, is just the fact that sometimes it looks like he coasts games, he makes it look a bit too easy for him, and obviously as a consequence he's a bit sloppy at times. But ultimately, sometimes you get that with players, they're a little bit out of form, they're going to be sloppy every so often. But like I've said already, he was fairly solid defensively, and obviously going forward he was better than he has been in previous weeks. So the fact that he had an overall, even though it wasn't the greatest performance by his standards, the fact that he was able to have a very competent performance, even though he was a bit sloppy at times, and even though, you know, he didn't have as many attacking opportunities as he would have liked, even though it was more than against Everton, obviously, you know, I think we can expect more from him going forward. And of course, you know, the game against Chelsea at the weekend, that's obviously against his former club, so obviously there's going to be an incentive there for him not only to continue with a good defensive performance to show them what, let's say, Chelsea were missing, but also, you know, he scored against them last season, so it'll be a great thing for him to come back and maybe continue that run of form by obviously once again sort of building on his attacking play once again. But overall, Patrick Vanano, I do think a 6 is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to the midfield, and I'm going to start with Cheku Kouyaté. Now this is a player, you know, last weekend against Everton, I thought he was fantastic and arguably one of our better players on the day. And once again here against Arsenal, considering the pressure we were going to have, not only from the Arsenal attack, but just from the midfield as well, in terms of the domination we were expecting before the game from them, in terms of possession and shots. Obviously, ultimately it didn't come out, and I think Arsenal only beat us by a few percent in terms of possession. So obviously you've got to look at the midfield and go, actually they've done their job pretty good, pretty effectively, in not only obviously in terms of restricting Arsenal, but in terms of controlling the game at periods in time. Now in terms of Kouyaté himself, I'm going to give him a 7 overall, and I do think he actually played a very important role in the team, and that was not just because of his midfield play in terms of, you know, making blocks, making tackles, you know, making sure that Arsenal couldn't get that ball from the midfield to the attack, as well as just making sure that we could just have sort of control over the game so we wouldn't get completely overrun in the centre of the park. Obviously that's important, but the thing that I was most impressed with his performance, and the fact that he played this important role, is the fact that he actually linked the midfield with the attack while also going back and defending. So the fact that he was able to cover sort of 3 aspects, let's say, of the game is obviously quite impressive. And obviously, like I've said already, in terms of controlling Arsenal and actually restricting the chances that Arsenal have, is obviously very important to win that midfield battle. Arguably, you could say because we had less possession, we didn't necessarily win that battle, but I do think it can be argued that we were expecting sort of 60-70% possession, considering how well Arsenal have been playing recently. But the fact that we restricted it, I think it was probably 55-44, 45, something similar like that. I'm not sure. It could be sort of one or two either side of that. But the fact that we were able to actually be sort of in touching distance in terms of possession with them, obviously you've got to give credit to the team as a whole. But I do think someone like Kouyaté, who was not only covering defensive positions but also midfield and attacking positions, the fact that he was covering all the field, you've obviously got to put, you know, credit on him. Now, obviously, when you're doing that, when you're covering all different positions in the pitch, you're going to be everywhere. And that, I think that's the best way really to describe his performance, in the fact that playing in the centre of the park, he was everywhere. And actually, in truth, I do think that, you know, he had to be given sort of, the fact that he had to be everywhere is basically what we had to expect from him, considering how sort of good Arsenal are on the attack. And I did sort of word that a bit weirdly there, but just to sort of summarise, you know, obviously he had to be everywhere because we had to sort of limit Arsenal, and in truth, you see, he sort of had to be that before the game. He would have had to have put in a performance like that, and that's what we would have expected from him, because Arsenal will always look to counter at any moment and any possible time they have. So obviously it was quite important for him to be everywhere, play all these different positions to make sure he could restrict Arsenal. And the fact that he done it, you know, is credit to him. And obviously the game plan was to stop Arsenal on the counter-attack, because what they do, they pass the ball around, then hit you on the counter-attack when you're tired or when you least expect it. So the fact that, you know, Kouyaté was everywhere, and even though he had to do it, in truth, the fact that he'd done that to such a high level was of course really impressive as well. Now, in terms of my final really point, and the main reason I've given him a 7, well, I suppose that's not the main reason, but it's one of the reasons, it's the fact that he won the penalty and obviously Milivojevic scored it. Now, of course, you know, I talked about it with the goal that Arsenal got disallowed. You know, yes, people could argue there's a bit of pushing in the box, but Lacazette handballed it. Similar situation here in terms of a bit of tussling inside the box. The ball's come down to Kouyaté after it deflected off a player, and obviously I think it was Mustafi is literally, you know, dived into him, slid into him and tackled him from behind. Arguably, I don't think there's any doubt about that. That's obviously a penalty, and it was nice for Milivojevic to put it away. So not only is Kouyaté, you know, contributing to the game in terms of his role in midfield, but also obviously it's not great being, you know, it's not something to sort of be proud of if you get fouled in the box. But the fact that he was able to actually get on the end of the ball, because he could have easily been positioned somewhere else and not got on the end of the ball and then not got tackled. So I suppose in that aspect you've got to give him credit. But I do think you get assists, which I don't really think is right, but I think you do get assists for penalties won. So in that respect, obviously Kouyaté's got an assist there, albeit not official. But overall, the main reason I've given him a 7 is really just of how well he played in the midfield, the fact that he broke up play, and also the fact that he got around the pitch, played a number of positions, and ultimately was quite key to us sort of how well we played against Arsenal. So for that reason, I do think he does deserve this 7 I've given him. So I'm going to move on now to the captain, Luka Milivojevic, who of course missed a penalty against Everton last weekend, but I did mention, actually, if you take the penalty aside, I do think his performance was significantly better than it had been in previous weeks. And obviously coming into the game here against Arsenal, there was a lot of pressure on him, considering he missed that penalty against Everton, and once again he delivered. So, you know, in terms of scoring the 2 penalties, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 7 overall from this performance here. Now, in terms of, before I go on to talk about the penalties, I just want to talk about deliveries from set pieces in general, because I do think actually he put in a number of good deliveries from set pieces. You know, some of his corners and obviously some of his free kicks as well, them deliveries were quite dangerous. So not only was he contributing to the side in terms of scoring the 2 penalties, which of course are important, but the fact that all of his other deliveries from all the different types of set pieces, the fact that they were also good as well, and the fact that players were able to get on the end of them and actually create chances from it is of course great to see as well. And obviously I think there was one time where he was caught on the ball. So although he was good in terms of the set-piece deliveries, there were other occasions, I suppose his negative part of the game, where he was caught on the ball on the edge of the area, and obviously Alex Iwobi managed to pickpocket him, get the ball off him, and obviously sent, you know, Arsenal through with a chance on goal. Ultimately, they weren't able to finish it, but it just goes to show sort of the sort of Jekyll and Hyde, let's say, performance of Luka, in the fact that he was so good in terms of scoring the penalties, good delivery from set pieces, but then the other side of him, you know, the Hyde part of him, is the fact that he got caught in possession on the edge of the area, gave the ball to Iwobi. Obviously, Arsenal could have scored from that. They ultimately didn't, but it just goes to show that, yes, he's got his Dr. Jekyll, he's got the good bit there, but then he's also got the Hyde as well, which is the bad bit. No, I do apologise for that sort of story there, but obviously doing GCSE English last year, it obviously something that does stick in your mind, albeit very useless. Now, in terms of, like I've said already, the pressure from, you know, missing a penalty against Everton last weekend, coming into this game, obviously he's going to have lots of demons on him, lots of pressure on him to try and improve that, and sometimes it can go either one of two ways. You know, you're either going to play so well and make up for that mistake, or you're going to let it come on to, you know, you're going to let it affect you, let them demons you know, affect you, and obviously that could affect your performance. But luckily for us, he faced them, he didn't let it affect his game, and obviously he slotted away the first penalty. You know, great penalty in terms of the opposite corner to the goalkeeper, right in the bottom corner, lovely power on it, obviously, to make it quite difficult for him to predict it, I suppose, because if you put little power on it, sometimes the goalkeepers can guess, but the fact that he put the power on it was obviously great to see as well. And of course that meant that we, you know, we're leading going into half time, and that raises another point really for me, is that obviously there was all the pressure from missing the penalty against Everton, but also there's lots of pressure in terms of that first penalty he took, in the fact that it was just before half time. It could send Palace, you know, into half time with the lead. So of course, not only has he got the pressure of missing a penalty, but he's also got that pressure of having one in the last minute of time, and you know, last minute of the first half time as well. So obviously, once again, all of that pressure put together, the fact that he was able to calmly put it away was of course great to see as well. And then of course, you know, Granit Xhaka, I talked about his free kick already, you know, how good it was. But of course, Luka was the guy, once again, like I said with Alex Iwobi, in terms of messing around on the edge of the area. Obviously, Xhaka managed to get the ball off Luka on the edge of the area. Obviously, Luka's tried to get it back, tackled him. I think it's a fair I don't think it's a fair challenge, you know, that's rightly a free kick. Obviously, we couldn't really predict what would come from it because of the tight angle and how close it was to goal. But ultimately, it was a great strike from Xhaka. But once again, like I've said, just two chances that Arsenal had, albeit they only scored from one of them, were once again sort of messing around on the edge of the area by Luka, is, you know, gave Arsenal two chances. So I suppose if you've got to look at the positives, you've got to look at the penalties, but the negatives, you've got to look at it and go, actually, you know, he needs to be a little bit more careful and, you know, not give away tackles on the edge of the area, but also not give away possession as well. And of course, we you know, no one would have expected Xhaka to put in that strike. You know, we know he can score spectacular goals, but no one was expecting it, so I can't really put too much blame on Luka there. But once again, I do think, you know, the second penalty as well, I do think that was also very good as well. You know, I talked about the first one in terms of he put it the opposite side to the keeper, put good pace in it and put it into the far bottom corner. That was great, but obviously the second one, the keeper has already seen you take a penalty today, so there's that pressure on you there. There's obviously pressure as well. It's, you know, you're in the final 10 minutes of the game, so you could get that equaliser, so there's pressure there. And of course, there's still pressure from last weekend, because albeit your performance has been better here, and the fact that you've already scored a penalty, obviously you've got a chance there, so actually to, you know, just finish off your performance, put the cherry on top of the cake. Obviously that there's pressure on you to score it as well, and luckily for us he scored it. And you know, I've seen a few people highlight it, and I do think these are really good points in the fact that obviously Leno went the same way as Luka took the penalty, but the fact that he put more power on it than his first one, and the fact that he actually lifted it off the ground and made it slightly higher so that Leno couldn't get it, that shows how good of a penalty taker he is, in the fact that yes, he's playing against the same goalkeeper again, but the fact that he was able to adapt his penalty style in terms of the speed and the height of it obviously made it difficult for the keeper, but also just shows how good he is at penalties. And of course, it was nice for him, obviously, to score in front of the Homesdale. But obviously, the final, well, to summarise really, and the reason I've given him a 7 is that although it was a mixed day for him in terms of he had a few bad moments in terms of getting caught in possession, giving away free kicks, but I do think actually on the balance he actually had a good day in terms of scoring the 2 penalties, as well as obviously, you know, drastically improving his defensive performance. And actually, like I said with Kyoto, I do think they were both sort of evenly quite important in terms of, you know, not necessarily completely dominating the midfield, but for periods of the game where we were playing really, really well in midfield, I do think he was one of the players who really, you know, really played well. And especially given the result in the end, the fact that he was quite crucial to us getting them 2 goals, albeit penalties, that was of course great to see as well. But like I've said, even though it was 2 penalties, I still think he worked really hard for the team. Good tackling, some great passes going forward, and I'm not going to necessarily say he's back to his best yet, but it's good to see he's now sort of on that road to getting back to the levels he was at last season. But overall, I do think Luka, I do think a 7 for him is a fair result. So I'm going to move on now to one of our other midfielders, and that is of course James McArthur. Now this is a player who obviously this last sort of few weeks or so been coming up for a bit of criticism because he hasn't necessarily been playing that great, and certainly your performance here against Arsenal, albeit we were fairly decent in midfield, I just think he was sort of just below par, a bit average in the game, and for that reason I'm going to give him a 5 overall. But before I do that, I just want to congratulate McArthur. You know, he's recently retired from international football with Scotland. Of course, you know, I don't really follow Scottish international football, so I can't really comment too much on his performances for there, but I do certainly think, you know, given the amount of caps he had, I think he had about 30 caps or so, so congratulations on that. And of course, albeit it's a bit disheartening in the fact that you no longer play international football, but actually I think it could play into Palace's hands in the fact that he's now going to be 100% focused on Palace, which hopefully going forward, in the fact that he doesn't go in international break, so it limits sort of his chances of getting injured, but also it just gives him that chance just to focus 100% on Palace and give all his effort to Palace. I think that's going to really play into our hands, because I do think, what is he, 32 now? I do think he was obviously coming to the end of his career, but I do think he's come to the decision, you know, with the few injuries he's had, and obviously the fact that he's not necessarily always getting picked now, I do think it was a sensible decision, obviously, to not necessarily quit but retire from international football. But I just thought I wanted to put that out there. You know, congratulations to him in terms of his caps. And actually, you know, Scottish players don't always get that much credit because they're not always that great, but the fact that he's been playing in the Premier League for all of these years just goes to show the quality he's had. And I personally think, looking back, I don't really know too much about Scottish football, but I do think there were a few squads and a few times where maybe the Scottish manager at the time, maybe should have utilised McArthur more, because I do certainly think he could have had the quality to obviously help Scotland. But enough of that, moving back to the performance against Arsenal. Like I've said already, you know, I think it was a fairly average performance, not necessarily absolutely terrible, but I just think he was slightly sort of ineffective, and I suppose the phrase to use is just very quiet. I think that's really just sums up his performance from him. You know, he struggled to sort of keep up with his opponents in midfield, but I just think that the fact that people like Chiarte and Luca was doing so well in midfield basically just meant there was a little bit more pressure, or there was less pressure on McArthur in terms of playing well, just because players around him were playing that good as well. And I suppose in terms of comparing performances, I just think McArthur's performance was the complete opposite to Chiarte's, in the fact that Chiarte was playing all over the pitch, doing everything he could to stop the opposition. But of course McArthur, less so, less effective. But like I said, I don't necessarily think he was bad, I just think he was fairly average. And, you know, going into the next game, maybe someone like Max Meyer, who came off the bench and played really well here, maybe he could be someone to replace McArthur, only because I don't think he's been terrible recently, I just think he's been fairly sort of average and ineffective. But overall, James McArthur, I'm going to give him a 5 overall. So I'm now going to move on to the first player in our front three, and that is of course Andros Townsend, who I'm going to give a 5 overall for his performance. Now this is a player once again who, much like McArthur, has had sort of, let's say, hot and cold spells this season, in the fact that he's played brilliant in some games, especially obviously against West Brom a few weeks ago, and of course recently he hasn't necessarily been playing up to the standard that we saw from him obviously in pre-season, but obviously towards the end of last season as well. Now of course we always know he doesn't necessarily contribute with loads of goals, but quite often, as we've seen, you know, in the last few games or so, he does put quite a lot of crosses into the box, so he is sort of involved. But this game here was slightly disappointing, and that's why I'm going to give him the 5 overall. Now in terms of chances he had in the game, there was one fantastic golden chance, as I already talked about with Patrick Van Aanholt. Obviously nice build-up play, you know, Ayew passing to Zaha, passing to Van Aanholt. Van Aanholt's put the ball into the box. Obviously about 15 minutes played, balls come in, Andros Townsend, you know, could make it 1-0 to Palace. But obviously, because it's so fast it happens, rather than sort of taking an accurate shot, he's obviously tried to hit it first time, and obviously it's gone just wide. So obviously he couldn't quite get the shot on target, but the fact that we had that attacking intent so early on in the game is obviously good in terms of a team's perspective. But the fact that Townsend had that movement to, obviously he was primarily playing on the right, but the fact that he had that movement and the ability to obviously be aware of the ball coming into the area, the fact that he was able to actually be down the centre to actually get on the end of the cross into the box was great. It's just the fact that maybe he just needs to work on that finishing, because it was a great chance, great ball in, great build up. It just didn't necessarily have that shot to finish off and score. Now I think he was quite keen to run into trouble rather than finding spaces. So quite often in the game, when he did get the ball, rather than trying to sort of get in behind and find spaces, he'd just sort of try as like actually just running into the player and actually trying to get past them like that, as opposed to finding space. So I suppose a negative from his performance to add to that missed shot. Maybe it's the fact that yes, he had that attacking intent, but maybe it would have been better if he actually looked to find space rather than just running into players. And actually, quite a few times, his attempts to find possession, or get possession to teammates obviously fell flat. So he is trying in that respect, and that's why obviously I've given him a 5 as opposed to maybe giving him a 4. If I'd done halves, maybe 4.5. Mainly because he didn't really have that much influence on the game. But like I've said already, I'm going to give him a 5 because I don't necessarily think he was that effective. But the fact that he still had a few attacking opportunities, like I've said, albeit trying to attack by getting into trouble as opposed to finding space in behind. The fact that he's still got that intent, and the fact that he's still sort of trying to sort of attempt to get possession to his teammates, albeit falling flat, that was of course great to see as well. Now, like I've said, I think 5 is a fair result. I don't really think anyone would have given him the 4 for his performance, but it just goes to show that actually there's not really much of note other than the missed shots and the fact that he weren't necessarily as effective going forward. So there isn't really too much to say. But unfortunately for us, he couldn't quite pull off some of the touches that he obviously wanted to do. And of course, that's when he had the ball, even when he didn't, because much like Zaha did, obviously some of his touches did obviously involve getting involved and getting stuck in with that defensive work as well. So once again, a player like Zaha who actually is not just doing his work up the pitch, but also coming back as well. But obviously, like I've said already, a few of his touches weren't really what he wanted to do. And obviously, like I've said already, because he kept running into players as opposed to finding spaces when he was attacking, that obviously meant that he just gave the ball away far more often than actually keeping it. So I suppose there's just a few negatives there. But like I've said, I don't necessarily think the work rate was wrong, or there was anything wrong with his intent. I just think it wasn't necessarily that effective, and that's why I'm going to give him the 5 overall. But overall, I do think, just to summarise, the reasons I've given him a 5, it's just because it was sort of a mixed bag performance, in the fact that there were some good parts, some sort of average parts, and I don't really think anything above a 5 really does warrant that. And like I've said, I do think he was quite dangerous at times, but he wasn't quite switched on, especially with that golden chance he had early on in the game. Yes, he was quite dangerous in the fact that he got into the right area and obviously was able to hit it first time, but obviously he was switched off in the fact that he couldn't quite get onto target. So overall, I do think the 5 I've given him is a fair reflection overall of his performance. So I'm going to move on now to, I suppose, I say it was our front 3, but obviously because players were drifting to different positions, it's obviously changed throughout the game. But I might as well start with the second player in our front 3, and that is of course Wilfried Zaha. Now obviously he won the penalty for us, and I'll go on to talk about that in a minute. But apart from that, I think he was very good offensively, and carrying on from his performance last weekend against Everton. Yes, nothing really came from that performance from an attacking perspective, but the fact that he had that attacking intent against Everton and brought it into the game here against Everton, considering how good Arsenal have been this season. When you compare it to Everton, they've obviously done significantly better. So when you consider the increase in quality of the opposition, both offensively and defensively, it's obviously going to be difficult for people like Zaha to obviously target them and obviously get the better of their defence. And actually, I think he's done a relatively good job of that. And for that reason, I'm going to give him an 8 overall. Now, in terms of what I already mentioned, in terms of players changing positions, quite often, more than not, I think it was mainly Jordan Ayew and Zaha that changed positions, but quite often Zaha found himself drifting out wide, and actually by doing that he obviously gave him a bit more freedom in the fact that he could target Arsenal's defenders one-on-one with obviously his pace and skill, as opposed to playing centre to his back towards goal and trying to attack players like that. So obviously he was primarily playing as a striker, but the fact that he was able to drift that right and run at defenders was obviously great to see as well. And actually, if you look at our front 3 as a whole, the fact that Townsend and Zaha and Ayew can sort of interchange positions, sometimes Zaha's up front and Ayew's on the left, sometimes Ayew's up front and Zaha's on the left, sometimes Wilf and Andros are up top and Ayew sort of hanging in behind or on either wing. So the fact that they've got that ability to change positions is great, but in Zaha's case, it was very effective, in the fact that when he did drift wide, it obviously gave him that opportunity to go one-on-one with defenders, as opposed to having his back to them. And of course, if you've got that, you've only got one player as opposed to the 2 centre-backs that Arsenal play with. Or is it a back 3? It might be a back 3, but back 2 or back 3, whatever it is. The fact that he's actually able to play against the fact that he's able to play against one player as opposed to 2 players obviously allows him to utilise his pace and his skill much better. And like I've said already, I do think he was very lively in the game. I think Zaha, even from the start, I think he went in all guns blazing, and that's the reason I've given him the 8. The fact that even from the start, full of energy, trying to get the better of Arsenal's defence. And when you consider the amount of chances we had and the amount of shots we had in comparison to Arsenal's few, it obviously just goes to show, like, people like Zaha, who had that enthusiasm, had that energy, the fact that they were able to get the better of them and have so many shots, that's of course great to see as well. But obviously the downside to that is that although he had that intent to go forward, he just sort of couldn't make the most of the early openings that we had in Arsenal's area. And like I've said, we had loads of shots, but we didn't necessarily take all of them well, or obviously, you know, Arsenal were able to clear it up. So once again, going back to that point now, we're not necessarily the greatest in the final third, but the fact that we're now starting to create even more opportunities, especially so early on in the game, with someone like Zaha being the main architect, that is of course great to see as well. Now of course, as the game went on, obviously half time came, obviously we were 1-0 up and that put pressure on Arsenal, and obviously that meant that they obviously came out second half a bit more rejuvenated and obviously a bit more intent, because obviously they wanted to get something from the game. Obviously they, at some point, it looked like they were going to obviously get all 3 points, but obviously we came back and obviously we got the penalty. But the fact that they came out even better in that second half basically meant that although we battled away, especially someone like Zaha, we sort of lost our grip on the contest, mainly because just we were so good in the second half that it just meant Arsenal had to up their game. And when they upped their game, we just couldn't quite match it to sort of the levels we were doing in the first half. But the fact that he still got stuck in, both for the fight for the midfield, the control of the midfield, as well as obviously his attacking work which he done, that was of course great to see as well. But overall, I do think, you know, the reason I've given him an 8 is the fact that he won that penalty quite late on, because if he hadn't have used his pace and skill to get past Xhaka and actually cause Xhaka to obviously stick his leg out and trip him up, if it weren't for that, then we probably would have gone on to lose the game. So the fact that he was able to, you know, make that direct run into the box, and even if Xhaka didn't tackle him, it was a great opportunity to actually stick the ball in for a cross. So obviously you could look at it two ways, but obviously, like I've said, definite penalty. You know, Xhaka's even said it himself. He's come out and said, yes, I've touched him, I shouldn't have stuck my leg out, and that's fair enough. You know, the fact that he's got the balls, really, Xhaka, to come out and say that it wasn't a penalty, I obviously commend him for that. But like I've said, the fact that Zaha was able to influence the game by making that run into the box late on in the game, obviously he managed to get the penalty, and obviously we were able to score from it, was obviously great. And like I've said, it was a penalty won fair and square. I don't really care what people are saying online, because obviously they don't really know what they're talking about in this fact that they're just looking at one angle of it. Because if you look back at Twitter, people who saying it is a dive are looking at the one directly on from it, so sort of, I think it was a camera in the White Horse Lane end, so imagine you're looking at that there. Obviously it looks like that they're running sort of side by side and he just falls over, but actually if you look at the other angle, which is from the main stand camera, you can clearly see that it's a penalty. You know, Zaha's running into the box and Xhaka's left his leg out and it's obviously caught Zaha's knee. And if you want to be even more if you want to be an investigator even more, you could go through it frame by frame and you can see where I suppose the way Zaha was running, so the where he was going to, and obviously as you see, look at every frame, you can see that as he's going there, Xhaka's got in the way, tripped him up, and obviously you can see that it's not a dive, because you can clearly see in each frame as it goes by, Zaha's trying to run to his destination, let's say, and of course Xhaka's got in the way, so I don't really think there's any arguments there. And like I said, I suppose the phrase to use is just a class act, because we know what we expect from Zaha, and he's been doing it quite a lot this season, albeit not great in some games, but you know, fantastic in others. But this game here, you know, I've given him the 8 because he was very effective, and when you consider how good Arsenal have been this season, the fact that he's caused them so many problems with his pace and skill was of course great to see as well. But once again, just goes back to that point, you know, he works hard for the team straight from that first whistle, and even if, you know, he probably should have scored in the first half, the fact that he's still able to carry on after missed opportunities like that, where he hasn't necessarily connected with shots right, the fact that he's able to carry on and still put pressure on the defence and basically not let missed opportunities sort of affect him, that was of course great to see as well. But Wilfried Zaha here fairly winning the penalty. I do think an 8 is a fair score for him. So I'm going to move on now to the final player of our starting 11, and that is of course Jordan Ayew, who I'm going to give a 6 overall for his performance. Now this is a player who personally for me, looking at the lineup when it was announced, I was quite disappointed to see him start. When you consider someone like Max Meyer, who's done so brilliantly in recent weeks, you know, I was quite disappointed not to see him start. But actually, you know, I've given Ayew a 6 because after his performance, I do think he did warrant the start, albeit Max Meyer was probably more effective on the pitch when he was on it and when Ayew came off. but actually I don't think Ayew done as bad as a job as we thought of him and what we expected of him when he was announced in the starting 11. So in that respect, I do think you've got to give him credit, because everyone was sort of deeming him to fail and just said this was absolutely terrible decision by Hodgson in the fact to play him. But actually, in the end, it seemed to be sort of an alright decision. But I do think that, you know, Sorloth and Meyer, who I'll come on to, these guys coming off the bench certainly had a little bit more impact. And like I've said, you know, I'm going to give Ayew a 6. He wasn't terrible, wasn't great, but like I said, he's been better than he has been recently. Now, obviously, within the first sort of 10 minutes or so, he was booked, and you know that was when Lacazette was through on goal, and obviously Ayew's run back, which is good to see him do defensive work, but obviously, you know, clipped him on the back, so that's not obviously ideal. And obviously, like I've said already, it was like I said with Arsenal, they like to counter-attack, they like to obviously sort of I suppose anger the opposition, or sort of restrict their chances on the ball by just passing the ball around the back, sort of tire them out. And obviously, as they're doing that, they then hit you on the counter attack. So sorry, it's obviously great to see someone like Ayew coming back and actually, you know, doing his defensive work. But obviously, you just need to be a bit careful, you know, not to get bullied off the ball by the opposition. But also, you just need to be you know, careful and obviously not to get booked. And obviously, because he was booked within the first 10 minutes or so, he obviously had to be careful for the rest of the game. But obviously, I do think that because he had a yellow card, he obviously had to be careful, but I still put himself a bit at a risk. The fact that he was still putting himself about a bit in that second half was of course great to see. And there was a challenge on Lucas Torreira as well, which you could argue could have been worth a second yellow. But you know, the fact still remains, yes, he had to be careful on a yellow card, but the fact that he was still putting himself about a bit, the fact that he was still trying to, you know, make an influence on the game was of course great to see. And some may argue he was lucky to stay on the pitch, but I just think that given the fact that his first booking, albeit was a fair booking, I just think that because it wasn't that serious or as bad as the other one, I do think he was alright to stay on the pitch in the end. And you know, at half time I personally said, and I've heard a few people say, that actually it would have been better for him just to take him off, not because he was playing bad, just because he might get a silly second yellow. Ultimately, he stayed on and got taken off in about the 60th minute, but it just goes to show once again, even though we weren't really expecting much from him, the fact that he's still put in a decent performance in terms of getting back, doing his defensive work, while also just working hard for the team, you know, holding the ball up, getting involved in the play, passing the ball to people like Wilf and Townsend. The fact that he was able to do that was of course great to see. And like I've said, you know, the first few games he played for us, albeit he didn't necessarily have that quality or sort of that attacking fault in terms of getting into the areas, but the fact that he's got that effort to actually work hard for the team, get involved in the attacks, that's of course great to see. And although he doesn't really look like a striker, he seems sort of more suited to a role out wide. The fact that we keep changing positions really does suit him, in the fact that he's pretty decent in terms of link-up play and getting involved with other players, so it's obviously great for him to play in the centre because he can link up of other players, but also it might be good for him to drift that wide, also because that can sort of drag, let's say, the other defenders away and obviously create spaces for the players who are playing centrally. So he does actually have an important role to play, especially in the game here against Arsenal, in terms of, you know, making it, I suppose, easier for us to attack the opponents. And like I've said already, yes, he may not have the quality, but I do still think that actually in the role he played here against Arsenal, I do think he was quite effective. But like I've said, I've given him a 6 overall because I do think he obviously worked hard for the team. Yes, he probably seems more suited to a role out wide, but the fact that he put in plenty of effort, the fact that, yes, he, you know, was a bit silly with his fouls in terms of his defensive work, but the fact that he was putting in his effort both offensively and defensively, that was of course great to see as well. And I do think, you know, overall 6 is a fair reflection of his performance. Now, in terms of the substitutes we made in the game, obviously Max Meyer, Alexander Sorloth and Jason Punchin were the 3 subs we made. And the thing that most surprised me about these subs is the fact that both Meyer and Alexander Sorloth, as soon as Arsenal scored their second goal, Roy Hodgson, like I said last week, in the past he's been reactive in terms of as soon as we conceded a goal he makes a change, whereas here he was proactive in the fact that he could see it wasn't working, we just conceded the other goal. So rather than waiting even longer and see whether we could sort of weather the storm and get back into it, he was very proactive, made the change and done it in about the 60th minute, which I think we were all surprised in the fact that Meyer came on, but we were even more surprised in the fact that he brought Sorloth on as well. So the fact that he made 2 substitutions more or less within a minute or so of each other, when he normally, you know, makes one in the last sort of in 90 minutes or beyond 90 minutes. Obviously that was a great surprise, and also a surprise as well, because it was obviously a great surprise because we wanted him to be more proactive, but also it was a disappointing surprise because he proved that he could do it in this game, which just really begs the question, could he have done it in previous games? And that's what makes it a little bit disappointing, in the fact that, you know, he proved in this game that with his subs, they come off the bench and they can make an impact. So it just begs the question, and really is a bit disappointing in the fact that maybe we could have seen that in weeks gone by. But in terms of Max Meyer, he came on from MacArthur, and I'm going to give him a 7 overall. He obviously tried to make an instant impression after coming on, couldn't quite find the finish in terms of, you know, actually getting that goal or getting an assist, but the fact that he came on, made an impact, you know, playing slightly further forward than someone like MacArthur was, the fact that he hit the bar as well, and the fact that he was involved with quite a lot of our good play in that second half, that was of course great to see. And in terms of just a few things about his performance, I think his passing was excellent. I do think technically he's great on the ball, and maybe you could argue he was a bit too right-footed. I saw someone comment that, so I thought I added that in. So people have argued, I didn't really see it, but people thought that he was a bit too right-footed, so maybe you could argue that is a thing. But the main thing really for me is the fact that he was a game changer. The fact that when obviously Roy was proactive, he made that change, and the fact that Meyer came on, not only because he was better than MacArthur, because what he done in half an hour was much better than what MacArthur done in 60 minutes, but also just that extra quality, and that actually, because he was playing slightly further forward, just that attacking intent was of course great to see. And obviously ultimately, albeit he weren't necessarily involved with that second penalty we got, obviously just that sort of increase in pressure and increase of sort of attacking play was of course great to see, and did obviously help us going forward. Now in terms of Alexander Sorloth, who came off from Jordan Ayew, who, like I've said already, had a fairly alright game, I'm going to give him a 7 as well, because I think he just sort of off the bench, he added us just that fresh impetus up front. And obviously because Arsenal, like Palace, were getting a bit tired towards the end of the game, bringing fresh legs on and a big lump just to run at the Arsenal defence late on in the game obviously was our game plan, just to sort of make use of it and, you know, use his physicality to get better of them. And when you look back at the penalty decision, you know, the ball's been headed down by Meyer to Alexander Sorloth. He's run about 30 yards, shrugged off a defender, spread it out to Wilf. Wilf's run into the area, then got fouled for the penalty. So not only has Sorloth come off the bench and actually just made an impact in terms of bringing that fresh legs and just having that physical presence up front, but also he actually had an influence in the goal in the fact that he was the guy who made that fantastic driving run forward, obviously to get the pre-assist, as I like to call it, to the penalty we did score. But like I've said, much like Meyer, I think he was excellent, made that real impact off the bench and worked incredibly hard. Now that's not to say that Ayew didn't. I just think the fact that Sorloth is a bit, you know, bulkier, a bit taller than Ayew, and the fact that I think he's just better at sort of holding on to the ball, the fact that Sorloth was able to use all of that to his advantage to carry the ball forward, just, you know, made a real impact to the game. And of course our final substitution, Jason Puncheon, he came on for Kouyaté quite late on in the game. Obviously no rating overall for him, but obviously I hope Kouyaté's injury is not too serious and it was just a precaution. But of course, on the other hand, it was quite nice to see Jason Puncheon come on the pitch. About 3 minutes left of the 90 minutes to play. The only reason he was brought on was obviously because Kouyaté had to come off with his injury. But like I've said, it wasn't really enough time for him really to make a full account of himself. But I suppose the good thing of this is just it's a game for him to build up his fitness, and albeit he's not sort of a mainstay in the Palace team anymore, I do think he is a very good squad player to have. Maybe not just because of his quality, even though he may not be as good as he used to be, but I do think his experience he brings to the side is of course is a key thing. And I do think, you know, we've got the game coming up as I'm recording this on Tuesday, tomorrow against Middlesbrough in the Cup. Obviously that's going to be a good chance for Puncheon just to get a run out in the side, and as he did against West Brom, I do think he was quite effective in that game, so maybe he could be, you know, quite good and actually dominate the game once again, you know, tomorrow against them in the next round of the Cup. And talking about the Cup, obviously I'll do a podcast after the game for that, but hopefully, you know, we'll be able to progress in the Cup. And once again, even though we may not be the best in the league, we're still in an alright position when you consider that, you know, the teams in the bottom three. But obviously it'll be nice to, you know, obviously concentrate on the league, because we want to make sure that we don't get dragged very, very deep into the relegation battle, but also we want to have a go at the Cup, so it will be nice to see what can happen there. Now in terms of just the general sort of oversight and views of the game, I've got four bullet points here. You know, I do think the formation, actually the switch back to the 4-4-2, but without Slot, because obviously, I could argue it was a 4-3-3, but the fact that we were playing with Ayew and Zaha primarily up front, let's say a 4-4-2, so the fact that he switched to that style of 4-4-2, where obviously it sort of switched between a 4-3-3, 4-4-2, and the fact that the front 3 or 2 players kept switching positions, the fact that he'd done that was obviously great, and you've got to give Roy Hodgson credit for that sort of better choice. And obviously the fact that he got rid of Slupp as well, I think it was just allowed our midfield to be a bit more packed out. And you know, people like Andros and Wilf are more suited out wide as opposed to Slupp, who hasn't been that effective. So that change obviously was great. And of course, MacArthur on the left, albeit he's not the best there, but it just gave us something different, because although MacArthur wasn't that great in this game, he's certainly done a lot better than Slupp has done in his last few games playing in that position. So of course that change was obviously good, and I was quite happy with that decision. And actually you have to applaud Roy Hodgson for that, because I was probably, I say I was getting worried, quite a lot of other people were getting worried as well, and I've read this quite a lot. But obviously when we saw the lineup, we were quite worried in the fact that it was something that clearly hadn't worked before. And you know, I'm not talking just about this season, but last season against Arsenal we played a 4-4-2, and although we finished the game 3-2, we still didn't really play that great with the 4-4-2, and it was only when we switched formations that we got back into the game. So it shows that actually, yes, it didn't work before, but the fact that Roy Hodgson tweaked it, you've got to applaud him there. And like I said, I'm not alone in saying that I was quite worried before the game, seeing the lineup, thinking we're going to get overrun in the midfield, playing a 2 there in that 4-4-2. But the fact that we switched between a 4-4-2, let's say in attack, and you know, in defence we were playing sort of a 4-4-3, that sort of change in formation just went to show, you know, or I suppose it goes to show why we sort of done so well as we did in the game, in the fact that it allowed us to effectively, you know, restrict Arsenal. And actually we are a good side in the 4-4-2, albeit it's not always that effective when we play this sort of variation where we can switch between formations and it's quite fluid, quite free-flowing. When we play this sort of style where the front 2 or even front 3 players sort of change positions, it is quite effective and quite good. But we just need to find that right balance, and hopefully things will be okay. Now, obviously we've got Chelsea next weekend, that's not going to be any easy feat. But, you know, when you consider Arsenal being playing so well, you know, unbeaten in 11 games, now 12 games, you know, when you've got a record like that, and you manage to sort of end their winning streak, obviously it puts you in good stead for the next game. Albeit Chelsea are doing a little bit better than Arsenal in the league in terms of position, I still do think, you know, if we can put in the same performance here, even if we lose the game, if we can put in the same level of performance, I'll at least be happy from this game. And I do think I'm not alone in saying this, but this was the best performance we've seen so far this season, because albeit the Fulham game, obviously we won that game 2-0, probably our easiest win in terms of, you know, in scoreline. But I do think this was our best performance of the season, because for the whole 90 minutes we played really well. We probably deserved to win the game given our domination in terms of things like shots. But it just proved that Arsenal are something special in terms of the fact that they've got this unbeaten run, but they're not. I don't want to criticise Arsenal, but maybe they're not something special, because we thought they were going to come here and absolutely dominate us. But the fact that the way we played against them just proves that they can be stopped. So I suppose I'm not trying to say that they're not any good or they're nothing special. It just goes to show that there is a way to stop the top 6 teams. So hopefully in the coming games where we're playing against them, we can play the sort of same system. And hopefully we're probably not going to win these games, but hopefully we can just, you know, at least stay in these games and at least give them a good match. So overall, best performance of the season, and hopefully performances like this will come in the next few weeks. So I'm now going to move on to the Man of the Match award, but before I do that and give you my Man of the Match and who I thought the biggest influence in the game, I'm now going to give you the 4 nominations I put forward for the award. So before I go on to do that and obviously give you the 4 players who I thought stood out for me in the game, I'm just going to give you sort of a general sort of summary of the game, but in terms of the stats, you know, because obviously stats are not always great to go by, because sometimes they could be misleading in terms of performances, but sometimes, like the game here against Arsenal, actually if you look at them, it did actually show quite clearly how good Palace were in the game. And certainly some of the players who I'm going to talk about in my shortlist, they obviously had their parts to play in that. But in terms of just a few stats I've picked out here, obviously shots, we completely, dominated Arsenal in terms of shots. We had 16 shots as opposed to Arsenal's 7. Obviously shots on target, albeit not all of our 16 were on target, but we had 3 on target as opposed to Arsenal's 2. So not only were we, let's say, more effective going forward, but also defensively in terms of restricting Arsenal, we were relatively good as well. Now in terms of defensive duties as well, I suppose you're talking about shots, both Palace and Arsenal blocked 2 shots, so you could say once again both defences fairly solid throughout the whole game in terms of restriction shots, albeit we got more shots than Arsenal did. Now in terms of the offensive play from Palace, 7 of our shots came from outside the box, so showing a bit more ambition as opposed to Arsenal, who only had 3 shots from outside the box. And of course inside the box we're getting into good areas, especially a few of the players I'm going to mention in a minute. Obviously 9 shots inside the box and obviously 4 for Arsenal outside the box. So they're just a few stats there in terms of shots, albeit you can't always judge the game or a performance based on stats, but I did want to pick out a few of these because I thought they were quite interesting. Now in terms of defensive play, obviously it was quite even in terms of tackles, Palace 22, Arsenal 25. In terms of the tackle success rate though, obviously Palace had less tackles, but we had a higher, or it was 2% higher, our tackle success rate at 50% as opposed to Arsenal's 48. So it just goes to show that actually, albeit we didn't make as many tackles, we still were more successful when we did make them. Obviously in terms of clearances, because we had a lot more chances than Arsenal had, we only had to make 9 clearances as opposed to Arsenal who made 33. So it just puts the game into a bit of perspective there. And like I've said already, quite a lot of these stats, and the reason I wanted to mention them is because I do think they link quite well to the 4 players on the shortlist for this game here. Now in terms of the 4 players, going to that, I've put Aaron Wan-Bissaka, James Tompkins, Luka Milivojevic and Wilfried Zaha. Now there was quite a lot of deliberation for me because I think there were a few other players, especially in sort of the midfield and the defence, I could have given credit for, but I do think these players, considering they link to the stats and also just my general sort of personal opinion of their performances, that's why I do think they fit well together in the shortlist. Now in terms of Aaron Wan-Bissaka, this guy never really fails to impress me, but once again here, against Arsenal, against another top 6 team, he was sliding in, making challenges everywhere, making blocks, everything you would expect, well, what we've come to expect from him, he done in this game. But also the fact that he had that discipline down that right hand side to deal so well with the attacking threat that Arsenal had, the fact that he kept Aubameyang so quiet for the whole game was really quite impressive. And also with him playing at fullback, the fact that he made sure that Palace didn't lose our shape at the back, and the fact that we were able to keep quite compact and quite sort of solid at the back. Obviously you've got to put a bit of credit to him, because sometimes if your fullbacks leave a bit too much space or are too wide, obviously the opposition could exploit it. So the fact that Wan-Bissaka kept his shape really well, as well as obviously making challenges like he always does, was obviously great to see. And in terms of one player in particular I thought he done really well with and impressed me, is the fact that how well he dealt with Alex Iwobi. Now Alex Iwobi hasn't been great in seasons gone by, but this season under Unai Emery he's been so much better than he has been under Arsene Wenger. And of course, considering that, he was probably going to be one of Arsenal's biggest threats, but the fact that Wan-Bissaka was able to deal with him is the main reason he's on my shortlist. But like I've said already, tackles, challenges, everything he done about his play was fantastic. And obviously the fact that he was also able to keep our defensive shape whilst also dealing with people like Aubameyang, like Iwobi so well, and the fact that they rarely really sort of got any space or any time down that side really is credit to him. Now James Tompkins, this was one of the players who I could have put really either Saka or Tompkins, but the reason I put Tompkins in there is just the fact that he was involved at both ends of the pitch. Saka was very good defensively, but he didn't necessarily have any attacking chances, whereas Tompkins, he was involved at both ends. Both defensively he was solid, and obviously going forward he had a few chances as well. So of course that's the reason I've put him on the shortlist. And like I've said, I do think defensively both Saka and Tompkins were pretty even, but just the fact that Tompkins was involved at both ends was obviously quite good as well. And like I've said already, like I said with Wan-Bissaka, the fact that Tompkins was able to deal with these skillful players so well, and obviously like I said with the stats, the fact that we restricted them to 7 shots as opposed to the 16 they gave us, really just goes to show how well the defence did. Now obviously Luka Milivojevic, when you score 2 goals, albeit 2 penalties, you're going to be on the shortlist here. But it wasn't just his set pieces in terms of the penalties that were good. I do think his set piece deliveries from free kicks, from corners, I do think generally they were good throughout the game. So of course it's great when your captain leads the team, has all that pressure from missing a penalty last weekend, and the fact that he comes into this game here takes two of them, especially the one, well, both of them sort of towards the end of the halves. The fact that he was able to do that with all the pressure was, of course, great to see as well. And obviously, it's great to see him, make up for it, I suppose, make up for that penalty miss, but also the fact that he's got his confidence back by scoring 2 goals, and obviously, being quite crucial goals in terms of helping us get the point. But like I've said already, both penalties were very good in terms of the first one was obviously away from the goalkeeper right in the corner, and obviously the other one, albeit the keeper went the right way, the fact that he put so much power on it, and actually, whereas the other one rolled across the ground, this one actually was a bit higher. The fact that he was able to change his height of the ball and the power of the ball just goes to show how good he is at penalties, and the fact that he's able to do that. So once again, good penalties and good deliveries from set pieces. And of course, my final player, Wilfried Zaha, this guy, obviously he never really fails to impress, hasn't been necessarily the greatest in the last few games, but this game here didn't really fail to impress me here. Obviously Arsenal's defence, hasn't been the strongest in the past, and although it's been better under Unai Emery, the fact that Zaha kept drifting out wide, inwards and in as well, that obviously did allow us to sort of get in behind the Arsenal defence, and quite a few times Zaha was given that freedom just to go one-on-one with defenders, and the fact that he used his pace and skill so well to get in behind, create chances, was of course great to see. And even though we sort of lost a bit of grip on the contest at times, in the fact that Arsenal was slowly getting back into the game, we obviously managed to get back into the game after that. So the fact that he was able to get stuck in when Arsenal started to get back into the game, fight for that control in the midfield and fight for that attacking influence, I suppose, that was of course great to see as well. And obviously the fact that he won the penalty as well really just makes it better, because I've seen a lot of debate about this, and you've probably already heard me talk too much about this. But Granit Xhaka, if you've got someone running into the box, you don't stick your leg out. Obviously Zaha's running full pelt into the box, and Xhaka leaves his leg out and tripped him up. So I don't really see any argument with that. And of course Zaha, there's not really much he can do there. So just combining that good offensive performance with the fact that he won the penalty is the main reason he's on this shortlist. But in terms of all 4 of these players, and actually the whole team as a whole, because I do think when you look back to a few weeks ago, the games have been absolutely terrible in terms of the Wolves game in particular. The performance weren't that great. The fact that we've been able to improve the performance against a tougher opponent, and the fact that we've been able to get a point, was of course quite impressive, and you've got to give the whole team credit for that. But I do think these 4 players, Wan-Bissaka and Tompkins for the defensive contribution, Milivojevic for both his set pieces, i.e. corners, free kicks, and obviously the 2 penalties he scored as well, and of course Zaha for his attacking threat overall. But personally for me, I do really think there is only one sort of clear winner overall, and that is Aaron Wan-Bissaka. So congratulations, Aaron, you win like your 17th, I think, man of the match award of the season. This guy seems to be on my shortlist and seems to win it nearly week in, week out. But once again, it was just an absolutely fantastic performance from the youngster. Like I've said already, considering the quality that Arsenal have going forward, the fact that he was able to deal with it by making challenges, making tackles, the fact that he was able to keep some of the best attackers in the league this season quiet, that was of course quite impressive as well. But like I've said, you can't give any discredit to the whole team, because I do think overall it was a good team performance. But I just think Aaron just shone a little bit more of his quality, and certainly if you had to look at the back 4 as a whole, you would say that actually he was quite crucial in terms of us keeping that solid defensive shape throughout the game. So now you've heard my match report, player rankings and my man of the match. That concludes this week's podcast. Now I've got interviews with Roy Hodgson, Luka Milivojevic, Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Patrick Van Aanholt following the game.
Aaron, point today against a good Arsenal team. Just talk us through that game.
Yeah, I think we started well. We created a lot of chances, and we took them chances, which led to the penalty. Then second half, they got back into the game, but we kept fighting till the end.
Seemed to come out really well from the start. And there was one move that Angelos just put wide, but the passing play and the build up to that was a bit like when we were playing really well at the end of last season.
Yeah, it was. I think the team's got confidence and going forward, which that helps as well, especially against a team like Arsenal.
And then Luka stepping up. What a way to come back from missing a penalty last week, like burying 2.
Yeah, I was confident that he was going to score. So Luka, and well done to him for getting the 2.
And for you personally, today, I think you completed the most tackles out of anyone in the game, completed the most take-ons, and also the most interceptions as well. You're really thriving against the big teams.
Yeah, I'm just trying to take on the challenge, and just keep doing what I'm doing. Take every tackle,
What was it like playing against this Arsenal team?
Because my first time playing against them, so it's tough. It's always a challenge, and obviously a challenge helps me get better, and that's what I'm willing to do.
And by the end of the game, the place was rocking.
Yeah, it was. The fans, they're all good to us. They're behind us and carried us all the way. which led us to get the last goal.
Some big teams coming up with this point, and especially this performance, give you confidence going into that.
Yeah, you know, I think we needed a point from this game, which boosts our confidence into the next.
Okay, you've just spent the whole week talking about penalties, but we're going to talk about penalties even more now. That was a good response.
You know, I'm very happy after this game now. You know, it's not easy when you miss and straight next game you have penalties. But as I said a few days ago, I feel confidence to take, and I'm sure I'm gonna score. I just decide where I wanna go, where I wanna shoot. I put pace, and thanks to God I score.
Did you decide before the game where you're going to put it, or just when you step up?
Before the game I decide where I want to go. Second one, no. Second one was just before the penalty. And you know, second one was very hard to take because it was in 83rd, 84th minute. We were very tired because we pushed a lot after 2-1 for them. But I think I shoot very accurately in the second one as well, and we deserve from this game at least 1 point.
It looked like you enjoyed the celebration. Is it a nice release running over to the fans like that?
You know, when you feel a lot of pressure on your back and then you score, your pressure is like goes down, and you know that the people are very happy after the goal. And you know, me and teammates, we are playing for our supporters, for our families. We try to do the best for this club, and when you score, you don't have other way. You have to go to your supporters and celebrate with them. I think that's the right thing.
You mentioned your teammates. It was a great team performance, wasn't it? Some of the play all throughout was the best this season, would you say?
Maybe, you know, because of the result, but from beginning of the season we played many good games, and in the end we dropped the points and we lost the game. Today, as I said, at least we deserved the point, because first half we had many chances. Twice in this game we hit the bar. You know, we create a lot of, especially after 2-1, we push. It's not easy when you're losing 2-1 in the second half, where you are losing energy as well. You have to push and you have to try against top team as Arsenal. And you know, after that we score second one, and we try again maybe to the third one, and that show from my point of view how strong we are as a team.
Actually, what's the general feeling in the dressing room after that? Really happy with the point, or did they feeling played so well it could have been a victory?
Yeah, it could have been a victory, of course, but unfortunately we didn't lose, so I'm happy with that as well. So take a point, but should have been 3 basically.
You must be pleased with some of the play. We had more shots than them, but some of the build-up play was brilliant today.
I think we had a brilliant game. You know, we started the game very strong. We knew they were going to press us. They're a pressing team, so the gaffer warned us. But we had a game plan, and we stick to it. And I think we came with the penalty, clear penalty, and half time we said they were going to come after that, and they did. Give a ball away and got a free kick, and then for that goal you got all the hands up. But I think the second goal, I just watched the clips and it was a clear handball. But the ref counted the goal, so in the end we got the equaliser, and we shared points.
And Luka Milivojevic, what a way to come back from missing a penalty the week before, scoring 2.
Yeah, we all knew he's good at penalties. He's our penalty taker. Last season he scored about 10 penalties and he missed 1, so we knew. Today I said to him, you're going to get one, you're going to score again, so don't worry about it. It's gone, it's a new game, you'll get your chance. And he got 2 today and scored 2.
And defensively, you're really pleased with how many chances you restricted Arsenal to, especially the run they've been on recently.
Yeah, like I said, we had a game plan and we stick to it, you know. We were very compact today, and I think the defensive, we did our job. But they managed to get 2 goals, but they didn't manage to break us down that much, like they do to other teams. But like I said, I'm pleased with the 2-2.
And finally, just looking ahead, we've got Middlesbrough in the middle of the week, and Chelsea coming up, and a lot was made of the difficult run in November. Does this give you lots of confidence going into it?
Yeah, of course. But like I said, recovery tomorrow, and then another game on Wednesday for the cup. So we go on, you know.
I think so, yeah, absolutely. Especially when, from my position on the bench, our players were complaining bitterly that there was a handball involved. I can't honestly say from the bench I saw that, but of course I have seen it now. And I think that most people, when they watch the TV tonight, will feel sympathy for us, because it wasn't exactly a touch of the hand. It was actually a hand which helped the ball on its way to the player who scored the goal. So I think that was really unfortunate. But it was tremendous the way the players came back from that. It's not easy when you've played as well as we've done in the first half and worked so hard to come in leading by a goal to nil, to see that wiped out within the space of 5 or 6 minutes. And the second one, to perhaps something which you're entitled to feel was unjust, to come back in the way we did and get back and eventually equalise and come away from the game with 1 point. The players are going to be very pleased with that, very satisfied, and they deserve a lot of praise and congratulations, in my opinion, for their performance.
Two very well taken penalties as well, mate.
Yeah, and two good pieces of play, I thought, in open play, which led to Arsenal being forced to commit a foul in the penalty area. Apart from that, they were very disciplined in the penalty area. There were lots of situations where, had they been a bit less disciplined, they might have committed a foul, because we had the ball in that part of their territory very, very often. I thought that, you know, for the 2 goals, the amount of possession we had and in the final part of the field and the amount of penalty area entries we had, I think that 2 goals is a fairly scant reward for our performance.
I mean, after having one save last week, it didn't seem to affect him.
No, well, that's all credit to him. I mean, I think that's an individual thing. I think that to step up once again to the plate, having missed a decisive penalty, which probably did cost us points up at Everton, as most people have suggested, to step up again in 2 very, very important situations, one just before half-time to put us in the lead, and then one to rescue a point. I think that's great credit to Luka Milivojevic. It's not just a question of technique in those situations, it's a question of mental strength. As we all know, when you work with teams that are going to be involved in penalty shootouts, there are lots and lots of theories how penalty shootouts can always go your way, but the bottom line is this, that when penalty shootouts come around, you need players with the mental strength to step up and score the goal, because if it was a question purely of technique, every single player on the field has got the technique to do it.
A word on Aaron Wan-Bissaka up against someone of Aubameyang's quality really showed his quality today.
Well, I've got to say, I thought that we were playing against a team today, you know, packed full of real quality players, and that's not surprising, since they've just won 11 games on the bounce and are looking like a really, really good team. I thought to keep all of their players of note so quiet as we did. The one we didn't keep quiet was Xhaka with his bullet of a free kick. But if we take the players playing up the front, I've got to say, I think that our front players and the players we had offensively in our lineup were much more noticeable today than the Arsenal ones, and that's great credit to the quality of the defenders that I have in Crystal Palace team.
Roy, you made a couple of earlier substitutions today. Both seem to be quite positive.
Well, last week we were unlucky in terms of both Alex and Max Meyer, who are obviously close to the team, were both injured or sick. To be more at the point, they weren't injured; they were both suffering from a virus. So, of course, when you've got players of that quality on your bench, you are always looking towards them when things aren't going your way to see if they could come on and change things around. And luckily for me, both did.
Roy, can I just ask, as a senior football figure, for your comments on what's been a difficult weekend for football with Glenn Bond's heart attack and the tragic events at Leicester, to put the game into perspective?
I think it's something which is events which should definitely put the game of football in perspective. I was really disappointed early on in the day to hear about Glenn, obviously someone I know, to hear that he'd suffered a serious problem before the game and had been taken to hospital and was being treated there. That was really, really bad news and affected me, of course, but it was then exacerbated by the news later on after the Leicester City game, which I just watched on the television, that the helicopter presumably carrying the owner and president of the club, had crashed. There are no words really that can describe how you feel in those situations, and all you can do, I guess, is to offer your condolences and your sympathy to obviously the family and relatives of the chairman himself, and to everyone at Leicester City Football Club. It's a bad moment. It's a moment which sobers everyone up in football, and tends to put some of the glitter and the glamour firmly to one side. Nothing can compare with life and death, and it's important, I think, sometimes that we recognise that football is a village. We know everyone very well in our village. They almost become family to us. So when something like this happens, you do get the feeling that in some way you've been affected by events which have hit you in your family. So all I can do is wish Glenn a very quick and speedy and full recovery, and extend my sympathies to Leicester City Football Club and to Vichal's family, and hope that they can deal with their grief.
So there you have it. Now you've heard what Roy Hodgson, Luka Milivojevic, Aaron Wan-Bissaka and Patrick Villano had to say after the game. That concludes this week's podcast for the game against Arsenal. But make sure to come back next week for a post-match review of the game against Middlesbrough in the Cup. So thanks for listening, and remember to up the Palace.